the math needed to understand the programs and college football's future. I'm Eric Hansen, fresh off the first ever ND Women's Basketball live chat, and now fielding offers from two of my grandkids vying to be my secretary. He's Tyler James, the presumed winner of his family's Easter egg hunt and the definitive source for Notre Dame football recruiting. Together, we're the content creators and walk-on admirers at InsideNDSports.com. On tonight's show, we'll take a look at where Notre Dame stands with spring football wrapping up its post-Blue Bowl game workouts and the spring transfer portal closing at the end of the week. That includes our takes on Steve Angeli and what's next at QB. Recruiting, we'll have the latest in Tyler's wheelhouse, and of course, your questions, comments, and quips live. So start filling up the queue. This is
Football Never Sleeps.
All right, nicely done. Hopefully our show tonight will be as lively as your women's basketball live chat.
That was amazing.
Good evening to our live viewers. As always, I saw some familiar faces in the chat already. Hello to Brian, Jeff, Rajon, Eric, Scott, Kenny. We appreciate you all joining us tonight. We want to hear your feedback and questions throughout the show. And if you're watching us on replay, make sure you leave a comment on this video as well. Everyone who is watching should be subscribed to us here on the Inside ND Sports YouTube channel. So I will give you all a moment to do that right now if you haven't already. And if you're
or formulate a good apology.
No. I do not accept apologies.
Okay.
And if you're not subscribed to us over at InsideNDSports.com, consider joining us with a 30-day free trial using promo code NDYT. That will get you access to all of our premium football analysis and recruiting coverage, which includes women's basketball intel that you're not getting anywhere else, courtesy of Eric. There's a link to use the promo code in the video description below, NDYT, 30 days for free. So check us out if you haven't already. We'll have plenty of content still to come with transfer portal activity. Recruiting never sleeps, even though it's football never sleeps, but recruiting certainly never sleeps. And we'll have plenty of certainly basketball coverage of the offseason because it is a particularly intriguing one for the women's basketball team. And there's some intrigue with the men's program as well. But tonight we're going to start with our discussion about Steve Angeli hitting the transfer portal. Notre Dame's three-man quarterback competition came to an end on Thursday when we learned that Steve Angeli would enter the transfer portal. Angeli, who has 2 seasons of eligibility remaining, will graduate in May, which is something that we had reported on the Insider Lounge a couple months ago. Rivals reported today, Monday, that Angeli is visiting Syracuse as he starts to go through the portal process. So, Eric, let's start out with, were you surprised that Angeli hit the portal?
I was not, because I thought if he was not the clear number one or had a good chance to be number one coming out of spring, if he didn't have a pretty good guarantee that he was going to be the starter this fall, he had his degree in hand. And this is just the way that football math works these days. If you have aspirations of being an NFL quarterback and you're a backup this deep in your career, you're probably going to at least want to look around. How about you? Were you surprised?
No, not necessarily. I had said after the Blue Gold game in my column that it was time for a youth movement. I do think that Notre Dame would be best served if Angeli was its number 2 quarterback. I just don't think that's the best scenario for him. And it's one he doesn't have to take on for another season. He can test the waters and find a new home that has a path for him to be the starter this fall. So that's why it's not that surprising. So, I mean, it's probably the same answer, but why do you think this makes the most sense for Angeli, if you do think it makes the most sense for him?
Well, I do. Number one, because he has his degree. I think that's why you go to college. You go to college to get your degree, and then you go out and get a job or you do something else with your life. You go in the military, whatever. And he has his degree. So he has aspirations to play in the NFL. He thinks that he can get there. He needs to be able to showcase his skill set to show that he can play at that level. And if he's going to be a career backup, as much fun as that is to be on a playoff team and do what Notre Dame did last year, I think he's done that, and he just wants to see what's possible for him. So I think it's, a good move for Steve. If I were his dad, I would, and that's the decision he came up with. I'd say, you got that degree. Yeah, you're not going to be counting on me to pay your bills. So,
Yeah, it just always felt to me that Angeli was the guy that Notre Dame was trying to do better than. Not that he wasn't a valuable member of Notre Dame and someone who was valued within the program, but I think he was sort of the bar that Notre Dame always wanted to be better than. And it felt like going into this next season that continued to be the case. And so he is going to find a place where he is someone who they feel like can be the starter. We'll see what that market looks like for him. Obviously, Syracuse had a lot of success last offseason with bringing in the transfer quarterback from Ohio State. And we'll see if Steve Angeli lands there or goes somewhere else. Certainly, if he were to have the type of season Kyle McCord have, that would be great news for both Syracuse and Steve Angeli. I'm curious to see what other schools may get involved, or if this is maybe a one stop and then he's done with the process. We'll see how it plays out for him. But the timing of things with him graduating in May, being able to stick through the end of Notre Dame's season so he could be part of the playoff run, it all sort of on paper makes sense. But I do think there is a risk with this decision because by not entering in the winter, I think a lot of options have probably closed for him. I think there was probably more opportunities and more teams looking for potential starting quarterbacks in the winter than will be now. I think I don't know, and then what does that mean in terms of money that he will potentially make? And now I'm not indicating that is why he's making this decision, but I do think it could go two ways, right? It could be, well, teams are desperate now, and so they're going to spend more money now. Or it could be, well, we've already spent all our money, so we don't have any more money left to give. And maybe that lowers the amount of options for him. So it'll be fascinating to see how this plays out for him in terms of where he ends up and what that market looks like for him.
Yeah, my thought about the risk is I think you bring up some good points. To me, it's a low risk, but where I look at it is the people around you matter. And if you don't assess that well, that could be a risk. And I know even in my own career, I started out at a tiny little newspaper in Southern Indiana with great people around me that helped me grow very quickly in the business. And then I took a job for about a year and a half where I made way more money, and it was awful for my professional growth. And then I ended up at the South Bend Tribune, which was an incredible opportunity and incredible environment until this came along, which is better now. But the thing that I learned was the people around you matter. I display the awards that I've won, not because I need that for my ego. It's the reminder of the great people that I worked with, and to remind myself that those are the people that are responsible for the kind of growth and the kind of success that I've had. And that's why I display those. Otherwise, they'd be in a drawer somewhere or a closet. So the people around you matter, and I hope that he picks that well.
Yeah, so moving past the Steve Angeli of it all, now we'll have Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr battling it out to be the starter next season. Do you think this at all gives us any insight into the remaining competition between Minchey, who will be a junior, and Carr, who will be a sophomore?
You mean who wins between those two? I'm not sure that it tips the hand as far as what the preferred skill set is. I think what it shows is that high ceiling matters, and showing the growth towards that high ceiling matters. And I think that's where I don't think Steve Angeli went backwards. I just think those other two guys jumped over him. And I think Notre Dame likes both of those skill sets. Both of them, I believe, have a more complete skill set than Steve Angeli. Maybe that's what insight it gave to us. But I still think, I thought going into the spring, CJ Carr would be the 2025 quarterback. I still think that. What changed my mind in the spring was, wow, Kenny Minchey is a viable option here. That's what changed during the spring for me. How about you?
Yeah, and my question maybe doesn't make sense, but without the context that I will provide now,
Okay, thanks.
that I've seen people interpret. I've seen folks on our message board say that this is a sign that CJ Carr has won the job, and that Steve Angeli knows he's not going to be the winner, and that's why he's leaving. I think all this means, in my opinion, that Angeli knows that he's not for sure the winner. Like, there's no certainty for him at Notre Dame right now. Right. And I think that's all this means. I don't think it means anything beyond that. I still believe that Carr will be the starter. That my opinion hasn't changed there. But I do think Minchey is a real part of this competition, and I don't buy the theories that some folks have said that this is how this is always going to play out, and CJ Carr was always going to be the starter. This is all sort of a mirage. I don't buy that, because I don't believe Marcus Freeman operates like that.
Right.
I don't know that we have.
But Brian Kelly did at times.
Sure. Yeah, and I think many coaches do, and I think it would benefit many coaches to do so. But it just I don't know that we have a lot of evidence to suggest, or if any evidence to suggest, that that's the kind of thing that Marcus Freeman would be doing.
Right. We had Andrew Hendricks on our podcast. I think it was the first time he was on, and he said in the 2012 competition, there were 4 guys competing. And he said when the media was in there, they all got 4 equal reps. And when they weren't in there, it was all Everett Golson all the time. So Brian Kelly had his mind made up that it was going to be Everett Golson. And Charlie did a little bit of that bait and switch stuff too, especially going into the 2007 season when Demetrius Jones was the opening day starter.
All right, let's get into some more portal talk. Before we get into the questions, please continue to submit questions that we will get to. We'll sort of run through what has happened so far in the portal, and then we can get to some of the questions you have submitted, because I know a few of them are related to that. 3 other players have hit the portal so far, and the portal remains open until Friday. Safety Kennedy Urlacher, walk-on long snapper Reno Monteforte, and walk-on kicker Zach Yoakum. Urlacher would be the most notable, in my opinion. I think most opinions. How big of a loss do you think it is to see Kennedy Urlacher hit the transfer portal and now have committed to USC?
I think the perception of the loss is much bigger than the actual loss, especially in the short term. I don't know how much Kennedy Urlacher would have played other than special teams on this team in 2025, given the fact that Jalen Stroman is in the mix to start with Adon Schuler, and then some of the most ascending players on the team are in that position group. You look at Luke Talich, you look at Tay Johnson. I mean, they would be in the top 5 in terms of guys that made a leap on the whole team at any position. Then you think about 2 really talented freshmen that are here already, in Jadon Blair and Ethan Long, and they have different bodies than Kennedy. I mean, 165, 163. Kennedy's 5'11". He, again, against Purdue, he looked amazing. It was viral video. But can he cover as well as those guys? That the coverage part of it, I don't think we had a very large sample size on Kennedy Urlacher. Again, he could turn out to be a really, really good safety, but there's so many other safeties on the roster. Ben Minnick's kind of found a place at nickel right now. He's playing well. You look, and Brandon Logan is coming in June. That's another really good athlete who is aiming to play baseball and football. But the safety position was the really, really pleasant surprise of the spring. And so, I mean, yeah, Kennedy Urlacher could turn into something really special down the road, but I think Notre Dame has a lot of those guys in that position group.
Yeah, I agree. It's a long-term loss, but in the short term, I think he ended up getting a little bit buried on the depth chart, and he's probably the fifth best safety, or at least in terms of where they were positioned going into the safety or going into the summer, behind Schuler.
With two guys chomping at the bit behind him.
Right.
I mean, those two freshmen are pretty good.
Yep. And we saw him lose opportunities this spring, and that was without a healthy Jalen Stroman, who could end up very well being the starter. So I think he was likely a special teams player and a deep reserve in 2025, but then someone who would have a chance to get in the rotation again next year. So we'll see how that plays out for Notre Dame long term, but I think Notre Dame's in a good position, has continued to recruit defensive backs at a very high level under Mike Mickens. And so I don't see it as a major concern. It does sting more when he goes to USC. I think that's going to be hard to avoid. And if you see him flying around USC secondary making plays, that won't be very fun for Notre Dame fans, I can imagine. But I think I understand why he made the decision, even if it is maybe more short-sighted than with the long-term vision in mind. And then with the losses of Monteforte and Yoakum, both have played throughout their careers at Notre Dame and stepped up when needed. I'm curious if you think, if you look at the bigger picture, should there be a longer-term concern about the potential for losing walk-on specialists like those guys, maybe not just at Notre Dame, but nationwide in terms of how you handle those positions on your roster?
Well, that's where we start to get into the gray area, and that's why it's a shame that the House versus NCAA settlement hasn't at least taken the next step and gotten its final approval, and then all the new lawsuits get filed, and you at least move forward with some semblance of rules, what the roster limit will be, what the scholarship limit will be. So I think it's really difficult to see a trend in this, but I think these guys, and probably at Marcus's urgence, have said, if you can find a place where you're going to be guaranteed a roster spot, let alone a scholarship, but a roster spot, I would go do that. And then, we had talked to Marty Biaggi toward the end of spring about how they'll go ahead and recruit special teams players moving forward. And, I think he's still looking for what the guardrails will be there, but they're still going to evaluate the same. It's just, will these guys be walk-ons? Will they be scholarship players? And will they have to be more selective? Will they have maybe one backup kicker instead of two?
Right.
But Notre Dame does have Eric Schmidt coming in June. I should remind people he's a kicker and a punter, a pretty good one at both of those. And that gives Notre Dame some cover in terms of injury or something else happening, abducted by aliens or whatever, for James Rendell and Noah Burnett.
Yeah, I think it's going to make the stakes higher in terms of that you hit on your scholarship specialist, or you're going to have to sort of process them out and replace them. And because I don't know that you're going to be able to allot a number of as many roster spots to special teams as you did without a roster cap, assuming that 105 is the number that we're looking at and we'll probably deal with moving forward. Because I think, Notre Dame has missed on scholarship guys before at those positions, and Notre Dame's not alone in that. Take Alex Peich, for example. He didn't end up playing for Notre Dame as a scholarship long snapper, but Notre Dame had Michael Vincent, who had stepped up early in his career as a walk-on, and he ended up staying for several seasons. And then last year, Notre Dame relied on a trio of walk-on guys to combine for the long snapping roles. Yoakum, like I mentioned, he played some last year as a guy that was doing PATs and extra points and field goals. When Mitch Jeter was hurt, he was much less successful at field goals than he was at PATs. He never missed a PAT. He was 20 for 20 in his Notre Dame career. And then even as a freshman, stepped up to be the kickoff guy once Bryce McPherson, who was a scholarship punter, couldn't do the kickoff role because he got hurt. So I think it makes the margin for error thinner. You just look at Notre Dame's roster right now. They have 2 long snappers, they have 2 kickers, 2 punters. And then, like you mentioned, they'll be adding Eric Schmidt, who's both a kicker and punter going into the season. But you're going to have to I think you're going to need your special teams coordinator to be a very good evaluator in who you're bringing on onto your roster at those positions when you have so few chances to hit with limited roster spots.
One thing that's really going to help Notre Dame is Marcus Freeman's attitude towards special teams, and that there's very few untouchables on the roster of who plays special teams. And
Right.
Not every team is like that. There's a lot of them that want all their starters in bubble wrap. And Notre Dame has a lot of starters that play special teams. And so that's going to help with this more limited roster.
We also learned today that Notre Dame lost its last 2 remaining walk-on defensive linemen earlier this spring, Kobe Onyoke and Quentin Autry. We don't expect either of them to enter the transfer portal at this point, but we will see if that changes. Notre Dame is now, I believe, at 16 scholarship defensive linemen with 4 more coming in the fall. Do you think Notre Dame still needs to lose some defensive linemen before they get to the season?
I think it depends on what the scholarship limit is. If it were somehow to revert down back to 85, Notre Dame, I think, is at 93 right now. And I think even if they don't have to revert to that, the natural, talks with players and where they stand, I think probably that's a position group where you might see somebody say, well, I'm like 5th string. I don't know that I'm ever going to play here. I need to find a better opportunity for myself. So I would think defensive line would be a place, because some of the newcomers, the 2 transfers look pretty good. And there's a whole bunch of freshmen coming in at those positions coming in June too. So
yeah, 20 scholarship defensive linemen seems like too many. That's a 5th of your roster, more or less, depending on what the limit is. And some defensive linemen can play special teams, but there's not a lot of
Right.
Defensive tackles usually aren't playing special teams. They're not usually running those guys out there for the field goal block. Those guys are usually the ones that are already on the field. And then, like, every once in a while, a guy will play like the punt protector as a back line guy. But yeah, so I would be surprised if Notre Dame has 20 scholarship defensive linemen going into the fall. Obviously, it's a very important position. Marcus Freeman wants to be O-line, D-line dependent, but the D-line is outnumbering the O-line right now. Notre Dame has 15 scholarship offensive linemen this spring. 1 more will join in the summer to make 16, and then they have 2 walk-ons. And D-line, I guess more D-linemen play in a game, but more offensive linemen start. So I guess you could argue either way which one should have more, but I think the number will probably need to be a little bit closer to the same than a little bit leaning too heavily in the defensive line direction. And then in terms of, regardless of whether it's defensive line or another position, do you think we will see more transfer portal losses before the end of the week? I know Kevin Garber asked something like that, and Brian Habermill. So if you guys have asked, what do you think? Do you think Notre Dame will still lose a few more transfer portal guys, or at least 1 more?
I do at least 1 more. I don't think it's going to be a deluge, but I do think they're not done with guys going in the transfer portal. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I think so. If the 105 limit happens, the roster is at 115 right now. Yeah. So are 10 plus guys going to risk not being able to play football next fall? Like, that seems like a lot of guys that would be put in tough spots if that limit comes into play. So I would imagine there will be some more. Just thinking of the timing. So what we know, like, this was Easter break for Notre Dame. So, like, I know someone said, Jeff Stevens said, kind of surprised there weren't any portal announcements today from Notre Dame. Just usually, I mean, the way the paperwork works, there's a little bit of a delay between that. I don't think guys were doing that during Easter break, probably. I think the ones we've seen were guys that knew right away what they were doing when the portal opened, and now we'll see some more trickle out this week. Notre Dame's final spring practice is this week, and so then we'll see.
And we have our wrap up with Marcus on Wednesday.
Yeah, and we'll speak to Marcus Freeman on Wednesday, and so we'll see how that process is going for Notre Dame. But I would expect to see more transfer portal entries moving forward this week. All right, Eric Swope says the Angeli mystery, money, alien abduction are not just enough to overcome Carr and Minchey. Your thoughts on his puzzling departure?
Right, I know, Eric. You are puzzled by it, and I can understand, because I think fans look and say, here's this guy that's been incredibly loyal to Notre Dame, has stayed through some circumstances that maybe other quarterbacks weren't, and then all of a sudden, I don't think it's money driven. I think it's opportunity driven, as we mentioned earlier, and not a guarantee that he would be the starter at this point coming out of spring. And he competed, and I think he was hoping that he could separate from himself, and I don't think he did. And so I think, again, with degree in hand, that meant a lot to him, that Notre Dame degree. He wants to go and see what else is out there. Now, these guys can always withdraw from the portal. I do not anticipate that happening with Steve Angeli.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, to me, it makes sense. I mean, we walked through why we felt it was a good decision for him, and the potential downfall for him if it doesn't work out. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the perspective on this depends on what you thought of the players, right? I think there were some people who were ardent Steve Angeli supporters who thought he should be the next guy to get the job, thought he'd put his time in, and to see him leave maybe leaves those folks scratching their head. But the same optimism that you may have for Steve Angeli might not be shared by the folks that are making the decisions in the program, and they're not willing to give him that certainty that, hey, you're going to be the starter in the fall. And so the best route for him to find out, because I do think there probably is somewhere, even if it's maybe not a program you respect as much as Notre Dame, that will give him the chance to do that. And if he's going to make the NFL, like Eric mentioned earlier, you're going to need to play more than one season, likely as the starting quarterback somewhere. And so Steve Angeli only has 2 left, and so he's got to start that process now.
Yeah, I mean, coaches have to weigh both what they see and what they think is around the corner and how quickly players at different positions can get there. An example at a different position is Tay Johnson. I'm not saying he was thinking about going in the portal, but Tay Johnson, they thought, this guy is just such an incredible athlete. At some point, he's going to really start to rise up. I think it happened sooner than we thought it was going to, given the fact he was injured most of last year, played cornerback last year. Then all of a sudden you stick him at safety, and whoosh, very, very quick rise. But I mean, you could go into spring thinking Kennedy Urlacher is going to be that guy, and Tay Johnson just blew right past him.
Another quarterback question. This is from Scott Fegan. Who will be the new starter and why? Which one of the two will make the offense more dynamic and a threat passing? The running game looks amazing, but we need to keep defenses honest.
I think CJ Carr will be the starter, and I believe it's because he gives them the best chance to win. Between his poise, his not aversion to mistakes, his arm talent, his decision making, I think he'll be really good at playing chess at the line of scrimmage. But I think Kenny Minchey has a very intriguing skill set with his ability to improvise and so forth. I don't think he's as much of a finished product as CJ Carr. Neither of them are, but I think CJ's farther along, even though he's the younger player. Remember, Kenny Minchey missed a big chunk of, I believe, his senior year with an injury. but I just think CJ Carr is the best option, and there's enough around him to be able to bring that out in him. I think the wide receiver core is better, although it still needs to keep coming. That's the position group. He's going to have a really good offensive line, and he's going to have an amazing running game around him.
Yeah, I think it will be Carr as well. I just think he is the most complete package of the two quarterbacks. I don't think that Kenny Minchey's running ability makes up for the difference between the rest of the package for Carr. Like Carr's ability to be the best at throwing the ball downfield, making the right decisions, and leading Notre Dame's offense. I just don't. And CJ Carr's not a statue either. Like it's not. We're not looking at. What's his name? I'm forgetting it. The Wisconsin transfer.
Jack Cohn.
Jack Cohn. Like CJ Carr isn't Jack Cohn. He's going to be able to move around the pocket and extend plays as well. Maybe just not doing backflips in the back of the end zone like Kenny Minchey. But I just think that CJ Carr gives Notre Dame the best chance to be the complete offense that Mike Denbrock would like Notre Dame's offense to look like. ND Saylor says, would Chad Bowden be able to poach Notre Dame coaches?
I'll let you answer that first. I got to answer a text real quick.
I would say no. The answer to that is no. I don't. I mean, he could try. USC could try it, but I don't. There's no sense in doing that. I mean, this isn't the time of year that would happen to begin with. And now maybe you're talking about next year, but even then, like I think the head coach has a way more. You're gonna if you're gonna make that move, you're gonna have to believe in Lincoln Riley as the head coach, not Chad Bowden as the general manager. I know general manager is becoming a bigger role, and there's a belief in Chad operating for USC moving forward, but I just don't see why anyone would make that choice to leave Notre Dame unless it felt like it was not welcome, or I mean maybe if there was a world where Mike Mickens finally decides I want to be defensive coordinator and USC is the one who offered it to him, then maybe he goes there. I don't necessarily anticipate that happening, but we believe that Mike Mickens will be a defensive coordinator at some point, but I don't think Chad Bowden would be the reason that someone would leave Notre Dame to go to USC from the coaching staff. I can understand if Kennedy Urlacher, he has a relationship with Chad Bowden from the recruiting process, and it's like, I know that Chad Bowden believes in me. I'm going to go to USC, and I feel like there's a clear path to playing time there. I can understand that. But that's not even then. I don't see that as poaching as much, because I think it has just as much to do with Kennedy Urlacher's positioning on Notre Dame's depth chart.
Right. And Andy Saylor, the GM positions in college don't mirror the GM positions in the pros right now, where they're above the coaches, that the coaches work for them. There might be a couple of situations where there's that structure, but at Notre Dame, Mike Martin works for Marcus Freeman.
All right. Well, some breaking news I was going to share from not related to Notre Dame, but the interesting offseason for Nico Ayamalieva. So he transferred from Tennessee to UCLA, and indeed what some had hoped maybe would happen, Joey Aguilar, who had transferred to UCLA this offseason from App State, has now transferred from UCLA to Tennessee. So it has become a quarterback swap between Tennessee and UCLA, and that will be interesting to watch going into next season. And maybe that eliminates Tennessee for folks who thought maybe that would be a potential path for Steve Angeli. So connecting it back to Notre Dame. But I thought that was an interesting development that happened here while we were live.
Well, you scared me with the breaking news part of that, because I thought, okay, Tyler may have some personal news here that I don't even know about, and maybe he's not confirming that he won the Easter egg hunt. Maybe there's something else there, but okay, no. Maybe it's just meatloaf for dinner.
No, nothing to share on any personal fronts right now.
Okay.
Jeff Stevens says maybe the NCAA extends the portal window if the roster limit isn't decided by the end of the week.
I don't think they're going to do that. I guess they could open it up this summer, open it up again, but I think it's going to close because I think there has to be some point where you're planning for next year. But it is a bit of a mess that this court case hasn't been resolved in it, and the unresolved part of it is the roster limits. Judge Wilkin told the parties she wanted them to come up with a way to grandfather in the players that were, and this wasn't just for football, the players that were on rosters so that they weren't suddenly without a roster spot and had no place to go. And so both parties that are fighting each other in court, and they agreed that they don't want to do that. So I know Judge Wilkin took letters and testimony from parties that have a stake in this of grandfathering that in and not going down this direction. So that's where it becomes messy. It's this particular issue. The rest of the issues have all been resolved to the point where I think she's ready to rule. So maybe we need Judge Judy to give her a little bit of a push.
Yeah, I think certainly the coaches would not want that, like to open up, like to add more uncertainty to the process. I think maybe if there was a middle ground, there would be some way to prove that you were like cut from a roster, and then you could have a freedom to transfer, enter the transfer portal. Although, like in the middle of the school year, or like starting a new academic year, you could transfer if you're a walk-on. Like I don't know that there would be any like if I were a walk-on student at Notre Dame and I wanted to transfer to Tennessee, couldn't I just enroll at Tennessee for next semester and then become a transfer? That I don't know if there would be anything that would prevent me from doing that. All right. Scott Fegan says, based on the players and depth, will ND play more 3-4 or a 4-3 defense? I like the linebacker depth and skills, but the defensive ends look pretty awesome.
I think Coach Chris Ash, is definitely committed to 43. And he's always been a 43 guy. Now, Al Golden came up as a 34 guy and was 43 at Notre Dame, but they're going to be 43. But what they do and can do is use the linebacker sometimes and put them up in that viper position or put them in a pass rushing situation or show some different looks. But they're going to be a base 43 or 4-2-5. And I don't see that changing, even with as good as linebackers. Then you really would need to lose some defensive linemen. But I think that's the best way to use all those linebackers. But yeah, there are a lot of linebackers on the roster.
Yeah, I think 3-4 and 4-3 is kind of an outdated way to talk about defenses because I don't think it's that black and white as it once was with the high need to use nickel defense. And I think a lot of teams that play, like Notre Dame plays a 4-2-5, 4-3, whatever you want to call it, but they're not lining up with 4 traditional defensive linemen in pass rush situations or all the time. Certainly their base defense has 4 defensive linemen, but that whether or not they're playing 3 linebackers or 2 linebackers is dependent on whether or not they're playing nickel and the personnel that the opposing team uses. So Notre Dame will be what you would consider traditionally as a 4-3 team, but they're going to continue to use different fronts in different situations when necessary. But the base will still look what you were used to seeing under the last few coaching staffs at Notre Dame. All right, Jeff Stevens says, was the new NCAA rule regarding the allowed formation during punting a direct reaction to the ND fake during the Virginia game? Did they kind of admit ND shouldn't have been penalized versus Virginia?
I'm going to let you take that because I was in the women's basketball chat, so I haven't gone over all the new NCAA rules yet.
Yeah, this was from last week. I'm pulling up the wording.
Well, then I'm way behind. I have no excuse.
No, the rule the rule that was approved is no offensive player can be in the direct line of the snap to the potential kicker or within the frame of the snapper on punt for the formation to qualify as a scrimmage kick formation. If a team is not in a scrimmage kick formation, it must have 5 players numbered 50 through 79 on the line of scrimmage. Additionally, if the snapper is on the end of the line by formation, the snapper will lose scrimmage kick protection and the opposition can line a player over the snapper. So I don't think there's.
Can you use Google Translate to put that in English, please?
I don't think they're conceding there that the call against Notre Dame was wrong. I think they're maybe strengthening the language there. I would have to double check what it was. The interpretation that, as far as I understand, from Notre Dame being called for a penalty there was because Jack Kaiser was deemed within the frame of the snapper, I guess. And Notre Dame argued that he wasn't. And so because he was, then Notre Dame did have illegal numbers, if that's the interpretation that the officials made. So that part of the rule was always there, but I think like in the direct line of the snap, maybe they're drawing a distinction that you need to be like more offset than a Jack Kaiser was. So I think it's just maybe adding clarity rather than admitting that there was a wrong done there.
Amen.
Scott Fegan says, who are the linebackers that get the most play?
Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, Kingston Viliamo-Asa, and Jaden Osbury, and I think Madden Faremo will be in that group. And then I think it's going to be those 5. I'm curious if Anthony Saka can contribute as a true freshman. Preston Zinner's trying to push his way into that playing group. The Kias are very interesting players, both of them, Kahanu and Ka'o, but I think Ka'o is probably a year away in the weight room from being a contributor. It'd be interesting to see what role Kahanu has. I mean, he's an older player now, missed last season because of an ACL tear or maybe a couple of ACL tears, and was on a Mormon mission for a couple of years. But he sure looked good in the 2024 Blue Gold game. But those are the ones that I would expect to get the most play.
Yeah, I don't have any disagreements there. Scott also asked, when do we run the fake next season? Pull out your crystal ball.
I'll say not at Miami. I'll say in the home game against Texas A&M. So Carter Carls can write about it while he's eating Papa John's pizza.
I'll go with the season opener. Why wait, right? Just get it over with when they have no new tape to rely on yet. So I would imagine that will be Notre Dame's. I mean, that was a big part of what Notre Dame did last year. A lot of fakes on special teams, and I think that will continue to be in Marcus Freeman and Marty Biagi's playbook as something that they can do when they feel like they need to retain an extra possession in a game.
It'll be really interesting, and we talked to James Rendell about this late in the spring, about if he's going to be involved in one of these fakes, because he's a really, really good athlete who played Australian rules football, 6'6", 229. But I think he would be running and not throwing. He was Riley Leonard's, I guess, roommate last year, and he said Riley Leonard said he can't throw.
Yeah, and they needed him to work on perfecting his punting last season more than they needed to worry about him being.
Although he's a 5-tool punter, Tyler, I heard.
That's right. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the transfer portal progress that Notre Dame has had this offseason. Feel free to submit some more questions if you'd like. Notre Dame has now lost 11 players to the transfer portal since the beginning of last season, plus 2 others, Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobira, who are no longer with the team heading into the season. Notre Dame has gained 8 transfer portal additions this offseason. And you can see the list. If you want to do the list, there's always a transfer tracker that we have available on the Inside Indy Sports website. If you go to the top of the page and go to transfer portal, which is about in the middle of the page, and then hover over it, you will get the ND transfer tracker, and that will show you all the comings and goings from from Notre Dame's roster this offseason. I'm curious, Eric, if you look at the two groups, which one do you think has more talent?
For me, it was it's not in the quantity, it's in the quality, and it was the incoming. I'm trying to think of how many of the players outgoing would be able to have major roles on this team this year. And it's surprising with some of them because some of them were pretty highly recruited. But I definitely think the incoming group has the edge. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's closer than that.
Really?
Well, just because a guy can't start.
Okay, when we get to a couple questions from now, I think that's where I'll make my point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think just because because Notre Dame has too many offensive linemen doesn't mean they're not talented. And that doesn't is Rocco Spindler a better offensive lineman than Elijah Hughes as a defensive lineman, or Sam Pendleton a better offensive lineman than Elijah Hughes as a defensive lineman? I mean, that's where you're. I think Notre Dame lost, from my perspective, I think probably 4 Power 4 starters, 3 offensive linemen, and Sam Pendleton, Rocco Spindler, and Pat Coogan. Those 3 are going to start at Big Ten and SEC programs. And Jaden Thomas probably starts at Virginia. I haven't tracked their spring progress, but I'm guessing he's a starter out there. Notre Dame probably gained 3 definite starters right now. In Devontae Smith, Malachi Fields, and Noah Burnett. And I mean, I don't know that you want to put a lot of weight into the Noah Burnett as a definite starter just because he's a specialist. But I think there's rotation guys with Will Pauling, Jared Dawson, and Stroman. And those guys could be starters depending on how things shake out and may play starters snaps. And you got 2 guys that maybe impact the season depending on how things play out with Ty Washington and Elijah Hughes. So of Notre Dame's transfer portal losses, which you obviously despise, kidding, of course, who would you most like to still have on Notre Dame's roster?
Well, for interviews, I'd love to have Coogan and Rocco. For the good of the team, I think having Angeli as your backup quarterback is probably the most valuable of the losses. I would have said going into spring, maybe Jaden Minchey, but how far Carson Hobbs has come, the fact that Chase Tucker will be healthy, how good Cree Thomas looked at as a true freshman, and knowing there's 2 more really, really good freshmen coming in, I'm not as concerned about Jaden Minchey, so my pick would be Angeli. How about you?
Yeah, I think Angeli would probably be my pick in the short term. Long term, I could probably go either way between Sam Pendleton or Kennedy Urlacher. I'd probably lean towards Pendleton, even though the need is lesser for Pendleton. And as we discussed earlier, the need immediately for Urlacher isn't high, but maybe longer term, he would be an impact player there. So those are the guys that I think are the most valuable, would have been the most valuable for Notre Dame moving forward. But I don't think those necessarily would have been the most important for Notre Dame going into next season.
And even the season after that, the reason I say that, Tyler, is I really like Sam Pendleton. I loved his family. I loved everything about him. And yet, where was he going to play this year? And then if you look at 2026, it doesn't necessarily clear itself up in that cycle either when you think of who's the best 5, unless you think he's better than Shrouth at some point, or Shrouth leaves early, or Anthony Knapp goes backwards at some point. At some point, they felt like Knapp was better than Pendleton, and Shrouth was better than Pendleton. Jagas was better than Pendleton, and those guys aren't leaving that we know of. So, and then you think about the talent that's coming in. Will Black, who's a tackle, but again, a lot of times when you have those, a lot of talent at tackle, then it pushes some really good tackles inside to guard. So that's where I just didn't see him playing. I think he made a good decision by transferring, but again, really, really like him as a player and like that family.
Yeah, I think guard is not like it's a very crowded position for Notre Dame right now, and that that's why all those guys left, right? And none of them were guaranteed
Yeah,
to.
maybe center would have been where he would have ended
Yeah,
up,
even
but
though he seemed to have struggled with snaps
yeah,
anytime we sort of saw him
yeah.
do that, but maybe another year of doing that would have got him in a better place, and that would have fixed things for him. How many of so I ran through this a little bit. How many of Notre Dame's transfer portal additions do you think will impact the Irish this season?
I think easily 6 of 8, and I think you could make a case for 8 of 8, but I'll settle at 7. Now, when you say impact, I think guys that are at least rotational players and playing, not necessarily starters, but players that are valuable members that are not just okay. Let's put them in at the end of the you know I don't know who the crummy team is on the schedule next year, but whoever the crummy team is, put them in the end of that game. Who's the crummiest team on the schedule next year?
Purdue.
Purdue. Okay, put him at the end of the Purdue game.
Purdue's still on the schedule. Maybe someone's worse than Purdue, but after last year, I don't think I can get myself to say someone besides Purdue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's 5 for sure, 6 that are likely. And my 5 for sure. Stroman's just the one that I don't know, like, because we haven't been able to see him yet. Like, can he stay healthy? We were so impressed with the safeties. Have they done enough to just sort of keep him in a role that's not as impactful as we once thought? But I do think Devontae Smith and Malachi Fields are starters, and Noah Burnett's a starter. And I think Will Pauling and Jared Dawson are going to play a lot. The two that I'm not as sure about is Ty Washington and Elijah Hughes. And maybe it would feel better about Washington if we saw him this spring. He's not arriving till the summer. Certainly Notre Dame has a thin depth chart at tight end, so there's going to be an opportunity there, but I'm not sure how quickly he can take advantage of that. And then Hughes may be stuck in a numbers game with so many all of a sudden defensive tackles looking for playing time.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. I think Al Washington is high on Hughes. Not sure what they think of Washington, Ty Washington. Now we got too many Washingtons in the discussion. But I think there's an opening for him, but I think it's going to be really competitive. I think Kevin Bauman has taken a step up in his game. Jack Larson looked good in the blue gold game. And I think I'm really bullish on James Flanagan coming in the door.
All right. Well, you cheated off my paper with James Flanagan because I had him as my earliest impact superlative back in December.
Okay.
Let's get to some more questions. Brian Habermill says, Eric, have you ever covered a deeper ND secondary?
Wow. Deeper. I don't think so, not off the top of my head, because you think about how deep the safeties are, how deep the corners go. And a lot of this is Mike Mickens, too. I mean, his coaching, it's talent, it's experience, it's Mike Mickens coaching and being able to play a lot of players at those positions and having the confidence to play them. I will say no, because I can remember years where it was a struggle to get good safety starters. And I can remember years it was a struggle to get 2 cornerback starters. And you're like, oh, well, so-and-so. I mean, remember Gary Gray, and he was like a 5-star guy or a high 4-star guy. And whew, those days are way behind Notre Dame right now.
All right, Spencer Kane. I haven't covered a deeper one, but I've covered Notre Dame much or a lot less longer than Eric. Spencer Kane says, who has more receiving yards next year, Jordan Faison or Will Pauling?
I'm going to say Faison because I think he's going to play outside receiver. I think Pauling will share time at the slot with Jaden Greathouse. And I think Faison's just going to have more opportunity. And I'm assuming he's going to be healthy. So I'll go with Faison on that question.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if it ends up being Pauling because I think Notre Dame likes him a lot.
They do.
But the opportunities there, like how does Notre Dame work when Greathouse and Pauling are maybe you're two of your best three receivers, but they both play the same position in the slot. So maybe there's a chance Pauling has more catches and Faison has more yards or something like that. With Faison maybe getting some more deep downfield opportunities than Pauling would. But yeah, I think just in overall snaps, I think Faison likely outsnaps him and then gets more opportunities as a result of that. Joe Long says, who do you play if Love goes down and what's the divided amount in percentages? So I think we have to write it down right now. If Jeremiah Love gets hurt next season, it is Joe Long's fault.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think it would be awful for that to happen. And yet I think Notre Dame does have really good depth at the position. It's not Jeremiah Love. I think Price becomes the lead back at that point. But I think there's a lot of other options there. Aeneas Williams. So I got to divide the percentages. So I'll say that they'll still go with a 4-person rotation. So I would say when it gets to the end of the year, boy, my head's hurting on the math. And I even teased that in the opener that we were good at math. So I'll say 50% Jadarian Price. That's probably too high. 40% Jadarian Price, 30% Aeneas Williams, 20% Kedron Young, and 10% Nolan James Jr. How's that?
All right. I don't have a ton of confidence that Notre Dame will play 4 running backs, at least in meaningful moments. So I would do Price at 50, Aeneas Williams at 35.
It didn't say in meaningful moments. It said the percentages. So that's what I did, including mop-up time.
Okay, well, I'll still stick with my percentages at Price at 50, Williams at 35, and Young at 15, and then we'll get messed up when Jake Tefelsky plays 5% of the snaps. All right, let's move on to some recruiting.
Remind me not to brag about our math next open.
Well, not to brag about your math. I was ready with my numbers. I was just waiting to see how you divided yours up.
Okay.
All right, Eric, you want to tee me up for some recruiting discussion?
Okay. Let it tee you up for a recruiting discussion. This is Tyler's wheelhouse. Notre Dame has lost. Okay, that's not recruiting. Here we go. Who were Notre Dame's biggest 2026 class visitors last week?
Yeah, so Notre Dame had a busy week before Easter break in terms of getting 2026 visitors and 2027 visitors, who we'll talk about in a second, on campus. Wide receiver Gordon Sellers visited on Tuesday, but that wasn't enough to get him to delay his Friday commitment decision, which went to Clemson, which was as expected. Notre Dame made a late push for the 4-star receiver out of Charlotte, and we'll see if Notre Dame pushes much moving forward. It's someone they like, and if he has second thoughts about his Clemson commitment, Notre Dame is looking for someone, with size at the wide receiver position, and he has that as a 6'3" guy. Grayson McHugh out of Pennsylvania, I believe, will be a priority for Notre Dame moving forward after he spent a couple days on campus last week. Notre Dame recently offered him. He's 6'8", 265 pounds. He is the teammate of Joey O'Brien, who's a priority target in the secondary for Notre Dame.
Out of Philly?
Out of the Philadelphia area. I expect him to make an official visit to Notre Dame, and probably a bit similar to with O'Brien, that maybe it's a Notre Dame Penn State battle for McHugh. Elijah Golden, a defensive tackle, he returned for the first time in 10 months. I'm not sure that Notre Dame is the clear front runner there. I would probably give the nod to Alabama, but Virginia Tech is a tough contender there too. I do think Notre Dame is certainly in the mix and pushing there. He's the number 21 defensive tackle in the 2026 class, according to Rivals. And then Gavin Mueller as a tight end out of Illinois. He returned for the first time since last summer. He's hoping to make a commitment decision in May. And if he sticks to his plan there, I'm not sure that he'll end up at Notre Dame. I think he would end up elsewhere in that instance. So we'll see if Notre Dame can get him to maybe slow down his process a little bit as Notre Dame sorts out its tight end board. Notre Dame wants all of its guys to get back for official visits. That right now, at least from the tight end position, I think I would be surprised if any tight ends commit before making official visits, but that certainly could change. But I think that's the outlook with the 2026 guys from this past week.
Okay, and you answered some of this, but I'll just see if there's any cleanup here. Who from that group does Notre Dame have the best chance with?
Yeah, I would say the guys that I mentioned in the middle, McHugh and Golden, and I do need to make sure I get a pronunciation on Grayson McHugh, if that's how you say his last name or not. I'm not 1,000% on that. I do know how to say Golden, though. That's definitely how Elijah Golden says his last name.
I'm proud of you. Okay, who are the most important 2027 recruits who visited last week? I hope Moonshine is in that list.
There was no Monshun who visited last week.
No mention of Monshun?
No mention of Monshun, but an even better receiver visited last week, and that's Jameer Brown, who's the number one receiver in the 2027 class according to Rivals and number 16 overall. He's committed to Ohio State. He's been committed there for a bit. I going into the visit wasn't sure it would happen necessarily. It was something that we had heard speculated about, struggled to get confirmation on. Actually, Andrew Ellis from Cleveland.com visited his school. I think it was the day before he made the visit.
What's his school?
His school, which is important, is Huber Heights Wayne, which is the same high school as Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens. So
and Emil Wagner.
So there's a lot of connections there to Notre Dame. He made the visit with some of the coaching staff there. I think he might be a little bit more open than you would think. I'm not predicting he ends up at Notre Dame at this point. He has a Buckeyes tattoo, I believe, on his forearm. So not going to be an easy commit to flip by any means, but is still listening to Notre Dame, and we'll see how that continues to progress for both sides there. Another receiver that Notre Dame likes a lot is Zarek Sidney out of Arizona. He's the number 13 wide receiver in the 2027 class according to Rivals. He's in the Rivals 250 at 135. And then at safety, Miles Baker is the number 19 safety and number 216 overall in the class. She's one of a few targets that Notre Dame has at Chatsworth Sierra Canyon out in California.
All right. And what is coming up recruiting this week? And do you have a Buckeye tattoo?
I have no Buckeyes tattoos. I have no tattoos at all. If I had Buckeyes tattoos, maybe that would cost Ohio State some games like it has in the past. But I think Notre Dame is going to have probably a bit of a slower week. There may be some more visitors added here in the next couple of days. Tayon King is the big one right now. A linebacker, 4-star linebacker, scheduled to visit Notre Dame on Wednesday. Notre Dame's in his top 10. He's scheduled to return in June for an official visit. He's out of Texas, Port Arthur, Texas. Texas A&M, as of late, has been making a big surge for him. Texas is in pursuit as well. Alabama, Arkansas, Michigan, Nebraska, Oklahoma State, and Tennessee are his other top schools. But Tayon, who also goes by Tank, has been high on Notre Dame, and so this will be his first time getting back in a bit. So that will be an important visit for Notre Dame. But I am monitoring the potential of adding some more names to that list, waiting to hear back to get some confirmation if guys will get here. And then I don't think Notre Dame's going to hit the recruiting trail of this week with its coaching staff. I think that Notre Dame's going to wait till next week to do that. And then they have into May to keep doing that. I don't know the end date of the period where the coaches staff can get on the road. I believe the Marcus Freeman isn't allowed. The head coaches aren't allowed in the spring window, but the assistant coaches can get out on the road. And I know one of the priorities in that spring window will be Gino Guidugli sort of finalizing a decision on who Notre Dame wants to target with offers at quarterback in the 2027 class.
Well, I love the nickname Tank for a recruit, but it's not as cool as Bone Crusher.
Not as cool as Bone Crusher.
And I am going to meet, and you probably 2 in a couple of weeks, we are going to meet Bone Crusher.
Allegedly, I don't want to get my hopes up, but I would
I'm
love
told
to
that we will.
Well,
I'm told
I've
he'll
been
be on our podcast. So
I deal with recruits a lot more than you, and telling me that someone will be it always is a long distance between the reality of that happening.
okay.
You can never rely on recruits that much. Even
Well,
when
if he's not there, then I'm changing my name to Bone Crusher.
even when you're a college coach, you can't always rely on a kid showing up where he needs to be. So that's just sort of the way that this job goes. Scott Fegan asked, how is the Chicago and Indiana recruiting going for 2026 and 27? Chicago recruiting, Bone Crusher is a recruit in the 2028 class. I need to pull up some names that I don't have names off the top of my head that I can rattle off. So give me a second here.
Okay. And while he looks those up, I think Notre Dame does a good job in Indiana. It doesn't have nearly as many prospects as some of the states down south, but they do a good job at least identifying the top prospects and the ones that are fits, go after them.
In the 2026 class for Chicago, Notre Dame isn't in a great spot with a lot of guys. I think Mikhail Blade is probably the one who's the most likely out of the Chicago area to end up in the class. Braden Jones is someone that Notre Dame has pursued. He's committed to USC. I think Notre Dame will still try to kick the tires there. But other than that, I mean, Claude Mpuma is an offensive tackle who has not visited Notre Dame. I would think there might be some interest there if he were to make a visit, but that has not happened yet. In terms of Indiana guys in the 2026 class, Notre Dame isn't really after anyone. They had offered Jeremy Finch Jr. early in the 2026 class, but he has not been a priority target for Notre Dame moving forward. He's a defensive lineman. As for the 2027 class, obviously Notre Dame just started offering a lot of guys just back in March. So it's early. Quentin Burrell was on campus. He's a wide receiver out of the Chicago. He is very talented and is someone that Notre Dame likes. Brock Williams is a tight end. I don't think there's been a lot of movement there. Cameron Wagner is an offensive tackle that Notre Dame offered. And then Braden Parks is a defensive tackle who Notre Dame will compete for. He is the nephew of Chris Zorich. So that will be someone that Notre Dame will be fighting to get. And then as it relates to Indiana, Eric mentioned one guy that Notre Dame is after, Monshon Sales from Indianapolis. I think it's Lawrence Central High School. Very talented wide receiver. I think he's in the top 100 in the class. And then Jace Brewer is also from Indianapolis. He's from Franklin Central, which is, I actually know one of my college buddies went there. So I sent him as soon as Notre Dame offered him and said that he might have a future Notre Dame player from his high school. So we'll see how that happens. But it's pretty early with a lot of those guys in the 2027 class as it relates to Notre Dame.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for us tonight, Eric. We appreciate everyone tuning in to us live. We'll be back again next Monday night for Football Never Sleeps. Make sure that you are subscribed to us here on the YouTube channel. Make sure you like the video if you haven't done that already. And if you know someone who's a Notre Dame fan that doesn't know about Football Never Sleeps, let them know and let them
wake them up.
Wake them up. Yeah. Tell them to wake up and join us on Football Never Sleeps. But hope everyone had a great Easter weekend this past weekend and everyone has a good week coming up.